as Holly indicated, we're going to talk a little bit about how to activate strategic organization designs and, more importantly, organization transformation. One of the things that I think we're all familiar with is the idea that organization change is a very common occurrence. In fact, there's been some recent articles written that would suggest that organizations are always on when it comes to organization transformation. Somewhere in an organization, something is in the process of being transformed. And the sad reality is that not all of those changes are as successful as we would like. And so today's topic for me is one that keeps me busy with all of the organizations that my team and I have the opportunity to partner with. And we're trying to figure out how to increase the likelihood that organization transformation can truly be successful. And there's a lot of things that go into that. There's probably a lot of dimensions that can affect it, but it's real. There's an organization that we had the opportunity to partner with a few years ago that was going through a functional transformation, trying to reposition the function from being, a largely decentralized, non-standardized function into a global capability that would really help drive some strategic work at the organization. And after about 4.5 years at working at this, the organization was still largely the way it had always been. And when they reached out to us, one of the challenges that we had to do was to try to figure out how are we going to help them get something started and going that can not only get them going, but then to sustain through the period of transformation. And it was experiences like that that unfortunately happen way too often that cause me to take a topic like today and want to share a couple of insights. And I'm confident that as we go through the discussion today, you will think of things in your own organizations and perhaps from your own experience that I'm not mentioning. And that's not because I want to pretend like I've figured out the solution to all of these issues, but what I want to do is share, some of the things that I think make the biggest difference and where we see some organizations make some of the biggest mistakes. So without further delay, let's get into some of the topics. There's sort of 3 big ideas that I'd like to try to cover today. The first is, and some of these are worded a little strangely, and of course we'll unpack these as we go forward. The first one is don't bluff your way to a win. This is a notion that deals with resourcing, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. The second big idea is that we want to talk about how to build out your change or transformation muscles so that your organization really can do this and do it at scale and perhaps even do it frequently, since organizations are always going through some type of change and transformation. And the third idea is not to is to make sure that you find the areas in your organization that are really misaligned to what you're trying to change and make sure that you deal with them and root them out. Sometimes we see organizations try to drop in some change, but the existing organizational inertia essentially rejects what you're trying to change. And so we believe that you have to get sort of down at the DNA level of the organization and make sure that there are things not in the way of the change you're trying to drive. So those are sort of the 3 big topics. Again, as Holly said at the beginning, I invite your questions because I think it will make for a much more rich discussion as we go through this. Now, there was an interesting piece of data I came across a little while ago, and it highlighted the idea that at the very top of an organization, CEOs sometimes overestimate their own organization's ability to effectively execute. And what you often see is that, if we take the first set of statistics here, that CEOs and the board have a pretty high degree of confidence. 39% of them feel like, our organization can indeed execute change. When you get down to the other members of the C-suite, you start to see a much less rosy picture. And then when you get even below that in the organization, you again see a bit of a gap. And those same gaps hold true when you look at the behaviors that leaders are expected to demonstrate during times of change. CEOs believe, I've got leaders, I have organization members, that are going to demonstrate the behaviors and take the actions necessary to drive this forward. While the percentages rise from the previous statistic on the left-hand side, the fact is that the other members of the C-suite and other managers through the organization are a little less optimistic that we can indeed behave and pull off the actions that are necessary. Which for me leads to that resounding question: well, how can we solve for this if the reality is that one, we're not being able to pull this off effectively, and two, there's a disconnect between what a senior leader, potentially even the highest leader in the CEO, what they can see and what we're able to actually do and pull off. And so as we go into this, I want to kind of get into our first topic here: don't bluff your way to a win. If you really don't have things set up to effectively drive a transformation, then it's really a guessing game at best. Working with an organization right now, in fact, that is going through a transformation in one of their business units, and they've done some tremendously good work up front in terms of scoping and defining, frankly, a future state. They got a really good game plan. It's more than just a vision. I mean, they've really, really put together some nice thinking on this. But they've hit this period, let's call it from the end of May up until now, the last 6 weeks, where things are happening in the organization, but they're working right now to get the momentum and the organization and the resources to move forward. And to their credit, they're working at it, but it's hard. And I think we've all been in organizational situations where, the good idea hits the reality of where you have to actually stand up and resource it, and it sort of grinds to a halt. And this is where, this organization is at that I'm working with right now. And some of the things that they're trying to do is not make this just a bluff. They're trying to actually, bet with something that they think can win. So let me put forward one of the things that we don't see as much as you would think, and it's simply a change structure. Now, this picture on this page is simply an illustration. It's a fairly complicated or large change structure. Some transformations don't require something nearly this complex, and others may even require something more complex. The point being is that as the idea, the germination of the idea for transformation takes hold, and it goes from being just an idea to something that we're going to move forward with, as is the case with the organization I'm working with right now. They now need to be able to stand up with some responsibilities and some dedicated resources, certain roles. Now you'll notice in looking at this picture, there's nothing too extraordinary about this. But how many times have we seen a steering team be largely ineffective? And they're ineffective because they meet and the topics of discussion are not that helpful, so over time certain members of the team are not attending, and so over time the steering team's import and power sort of fizzles. Think about program directors, people who have a day job, who get named to be the program manager or program director for a large transformation and are trying to squeeze it in to all of the other responsibilities that they carry. You'll notice down here at the lower part of the organization, there's a whole set of teams. And often we do spin up a lot of different work teams to go and tackle different aspects of an organization transformation. But how well are they coordinated? Are there means and mechanisms in place to report back, to highlight inconsistencies, to share recommendations, to bring forward issues that need to be resolved by the steering team or by the sponsor or others? And so what we sometimes see is some teams are very effective. They've got good project leadership. They've got good team members, and so they move forward effectively. And others often move forward in a fairly ineffective way. They don't get off the ground. If they do, they put together something haphazard. It's not well connected, and then it sort of fizzles out. And yet another dimension you may notice here on the far right is you see some supporting teams, the HR Change Advisory Committee, for example. Another one might be the Change and Communications team. Now, we're not looking to just add teams and make up work for people to do, but in a large transformation, we've seen issues around titling come up. One group feels like a certain position should be titled or graded at a certain level, and another part of the organization feels it should be different than that. Or they get a little envious of one another if one area's roles get graded at a bit higher level than their area's roles. And so by putting in place an advisory committee led by HR, sometimes you can bring those issues forward and say, look, we have some comparable roles here, and we want to make sure that these are being defined and graded and titled in a consistent way so that we don't see a talent movement inadvertently from one area to another because we haven't thought through how to coordinate that. Same thing with the change in communications team. There's so many things during a transformation to communicate. If you leave it up to every team, they'll do their work and they'll communicate it. The problem is that those communications may hit the recipients or their users in a fairly uncoordinated way. And so I've probably said enough, but this change structure for me and any others that you should create around it is one of the missing elements that we often see happen in a transformation effort. Now, if I go forward a little bit, this is another eye chart, and even the next page that I'm going to put up is even a bigger eye chart. But the point here is that those boxes on the previous page shouldn't just be boxes with names in them of certain temporary roles. These should be boxes that hold certain responsibilities, certain decision rights, and they should be organized in such a way that there's clarity on when they need to work, how they report out, how they make decisions, and what kind of time commitment is going to be required. If I move forward, you can see that each role should have some specific responsibilities. Now again, this may look burdensome for certain transformations. Others, it might look like it's really under-resourced. But what I've tried to do is provide sort of a middle-of-the-road kind of example here of one of the things that often is under-resourced and under-addressed in organization transformation. And there's yet another page here with some examples.